welcome everybody to, actually, I forgot to check what book club number it is, 18, 19 or so.
I
We have had a little bit of, oh, do you know, Justin?
know.
No. I will fact check that later. But we have had a little hiatus and we are now back. Um, oh, Julie, I'll just get you to turn off your video if that's okay, because yep, we'll have all everyone come on later. But welcome. Um, so yeah, for the first part, we'll just have Justin, my lovely book club co-host, and I. We've got a few questions we really want to ask Ash about his fabulous book here. We have the blue cover, and I know there's a newer cover, but
Yeah, there is. I mean, I very poorly didn't bring a copy of the book with me to my workspace, so I can't show you what the new
totally.
cover looks like. But they've made it look much more smart thinking. So it's kind of blue and green, but it's basically a white cover,
Ah,
and
Yeah, it's also
sort of
quite
really focused on.
striking. Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
is. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I think the blue cover's gorgeous as well.
I think this is the prettiest one, so I'm happy to
Mm.
own this one. But
Yeah,
yeah, I was just telling Justin that the new version has a different subtitle, which I think is quite. It explains the book quite well as well. So
yeah. So the new subtitle, so the original title was "Why We Travel: A Journey into Human Motivation," but the new subtitle is "Why We Travel: 12 Reasons to Travel and What They Can Teach Us About Life." Because I think, particularly the feedback that I got on the first year of the book being published was that people found the way I explored it, it's about what I have applied in my life and the things that I learned through travel. And interestingly, a lot of people have applied some of those lessons to things like parenting
mm,
and
amazing. Yeah,
leadership.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's I think that's been an interesting development.
It makes sense to me because I think a lot of the things we learn from travel are very like it's easier sometimes to learn them while we're traveling because it's you're out of your comfort zone. It's a kind of a situation that leads to learning. But then yeah, bring them back to the rest of your life. That seems like a perfect approach.
Uh, yeah, and one of the great things about it is just having lots of conversations. I've been doing lots of events like Hay Festival and Cheltenham Festival, and the realization that travel is not an end state. Travel is not an objective. Travel is a mechanism that gets you to something else. You can travel in lots of different ways. You can travel for different motivations. But in terms of the outcomes, once you travel, you gain something, you learn something, you're challenged, you develop, you grow empathy, you satiate your curiosity. But travel's just a way to get there, rather than
Yeah.
being an end state in itself.
I really love that idea because I think that we talk a lot about, well, I mean, the over tourism and bucket list, sightseeing checklists. And I don't really love that kind of travel. And that's that, travel is the means to the end. It's I want to tick off this stuff. But I much prefer the approach you've just described. So, yeah.
Well, certainly, I think bucket lists have some use because they're good sort of hook for what maybe interests you already. So they're kind of a nice guide. Then reminding yourself that travel shouldn't feel like a series of objectives or tasks that you've completed, because otherwise it can start to feel a bit like a job. And
Yeah.
and the anticipation is really good. But if you overdo the anticipation and put a lot of weight on a particular event, activity, or sightseeing, then it very rarely lives up to its expectation if you do it like that. But if you can use it as a sort of hook to then do other things, then I think that's where bucket list can be a handy shortcut to helping you understand your motivations.
Yeah, that sounds fair. And I think especially if you remember to customize the bucket list, let's say, like, not find that, it's the top 10 things to do in London and that's now my list. But hey, what
Mm.
are some of the things to do in London? And therefore, what really interests me and what do I want to do? So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. I was actually going to do a little intro, but we've got off track because I had all these questions already. But so welcome to the I don't know quite what number Thoughtful Travelers Book Club. We are very excited to have Ash Bhardwaj here today to talk about why we travel. And it will work a little bit like this for anyone who's watching. Justin and I have a few questions to give, and then after that, anyone who's watching if you're on Zoom, you're welcome to then we'll call for you to butt in with your questions. You can come on video or type if you want, and you can, of course, everyone watching on Facebook, type in a question if you want. And if you don't, Justin and I have enough questions and curiosities, and I know Ash, you have a lot of great stories, so we will. I'm sure we will be fine. So when I first saw your book, it was actually I was like, hey, this is the book I wanted to write. That's how I felt. I was like, hey, this is, I've been pondering one day I want to, I've been running this podcast nearly a decade and I've always wanted to publish a book. And this was kind of what I thought I wanted to write, but you've done a much better job of it. So thank you. Now I don't have to do that. And I'll get on with something else instead. But for anyone listening or watching who might not have read it yet, I just want to explain that it is, as per the subtitle, divided into 12 chapters of the reasons that travel gives us something. And those chapters are things like curiosity, inspiration, empathy, wonder, hope, and various other kinds of beautiful intangibles like that. And I think it's a great way to frame the stuff that we talk about. So, welcome, Ash. And I'm going to throw to Justin for the first question.
Yeah, so I'm always curious about people's what I like to call their origin travel story, why they got into travel in the first place, and then compare it to how I started getting into travel and things like that. But yours was like a rugby tour to New Zealand, which, as lovely as New Zealand is, but I know what sort of happens on rugby tours and things like that. And you also mentioned in and around that chapter things like, the discovery and pioneering and things like that. But I'm just wondering, like, there would have been a lot of people on that rugby tour that wouldn't have come back with this love of travel that you got. And I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a bit more on what you think might have been on that tour. I know you mentioned stuff about staying with families and things like that, but yeah, is there anything else in there you think that you can add to that?
Thanks very much, guys. Well, thanks, Amanda and Justin, for having me, and thanks everyone else for dialing in. So I grew up in social housing in southeast England, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't really go on holiday much. We didn't do the classic, what we call in the UK, fly and flop holidays, which is getting on a cheap flight to south of Spain and just lying on a beach for 2 weeks and parents drinking cocktails and the kids splashing about in the pool. That wasn't what we did. I was raised by my mum, and she would take us to Oxfordshire or down to see her brother in Devon, and maybe every now and again we'd go to Holland. So we didn't have particularly exotic holidays, but I always remember, particularly in Holland, just really being excited by the sense of otherness in Holland, in that everything has really funny words like orange juices, sinaasappelsap, and they had things that we didn't have in England, like really tasty smoked sausage and that kind of stuff. So I always found it exciting and interesting to see the otherness. Whereas I think the other form of travel, fly and flop or going to Disneyland, is a very commodified form of travel where you're selling services and activities and you're selling experiences, selling or encouraging the visitor to buy trinkets and tat, all that kind of thing. That's kind of what a lot of travel and tourism marketing is driven towards because it's easily commercialized. And I'm also half Indian, and my mum, despite being English, was the person that really connected to my Indian heritage. My dad wasn't very involved, but she would take me to go and see my Indian family. So I was always interested in other culture already. So that was kind of the background. And then I loved Michael Palin documentaries around the world, pole to pole, those sorts of things. And I'm probably an unusual thing that helped frame my curiosity and interest was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, which has got this very positive view of otherness and alien culture and those sorts of things, and a sense of discovery. That seems to be the driving force behind it. It's about learning and peaceable coexistence with other peoples. So, probably consciously at the time, I wasn't thinking all of these things. And I grew up in a restaurant, so I was also very used to talking to older people. So I didn't have that same shyness about speaking to different people. So it's probably a whole host of things that meant that when we did go on this rugby tour, I was looking at it slightly differently to my peers who'd often gone on holidays to expensive or distant places, but in a very sort of tour package way of traveling. So that might have been one part of it. The other thing is I found Australia and New Zealand excitingly different from each other. You know, both countries have got the Union Jack on their flag, both colonized by the British, both with British laws, effectively British parliamentary system, lots of things that seem very familiar. Both play rugby, both play cricket, both eat lamb. You know. But the real thing that I noticed on stepping off the plane in New Zealand was the prominence of the indigenous Maori culture, which certainly in 2000, you know, First Nations peoples in Australia were not prominent in mainstream culture. So that I was just really surprised at the level of which that was the case. We were on a rugby tour, so the haka and the All Blacks and things were, you know, it's part of what made the All Blacks so exciting, certainly back in around 2000 when they were such a dominant team. Um, and therefore, that kind of provoked a curiosity in me. Like, why is it like this? What's the difference between these two places? And because we were staying with families, I had immediate access to be able to ask people those questions. And then when I returned to New Zealand and Australia later on, I was able to explore some of those stories through traveling and then living in both places. And then eventually as a journalist. So I've gone and done quite a few stories about Maori culture and its interface with wider Kiwi culture in New Zealand. And I'd like to do the same for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stories in Australia at some point. So I think there was all of those things that just primed me to have that curiosity. So I didn't view Australia, New Zealand as just places to buy trinkets, but as places that really expanded me. And I think it was also at a time where I sort of really figured out, oh, this is the thing that really interests me, traveling and learning about cultures. It excited me in a way that, I don't know, cars excited other people. It was just the thing that really invoked my curiosity. And back to your question about pioneers, Justin, it's in the chapter where I explore curiosity. And curiosity is, I think, the defining capability that makes humans such a successful species. It's why we've managed to colonize the whole globe and survive in such complex environments, ranging from jungle to desert to the Arctic. It's figuring things out. And that's deeply rooted in human ability. And then I explore the evolution of that. So you have curiosity, which makes somebody just look over the horizon and go, why is this like this? And then inspiration is when someone's heard a story that they want to go and learn more about something.
Yeah, I think that chapter can resonate with a lot of people because it's just that I think if you don't have that curiosity, especially, you're probably going to do, as you said, those sort of resort holidays or whatever, because you're just going for the change of scenery, but you don't really want to have to put too much effort into it, and you're not fussed about what you're really doing. Whereas if you're traveling and you've got that curiosity, and it doesn't matter, you can find things in the most travel places in the world that you won't find an Instagram post on.
Yeah.
And it's a great experience. So I think people with that kind of level of curiosity would definitely find a difference in their travel when they do it. So yeah, no, that was good. Thank you.
And I think something I really like to emphasize is that I don't think there's a hierarchy of motivations. So
No.
whilst I discuss curiosity and service and healing as motivations for travel, most people travel most of the time for two main reasons: psychological healing, having a break and taking some time to reflect on things, or hedonism, which is the pursuit of pleasure, but also the avoidance of pain. So those are the main reasons why we travel on a holiday. And those sorts of resort holidays certainly allow those kind of things. It allows you to not have to think about anything apart from what time you're going to start drinking and what you're going to have for dinner. Those are the kind of two main decisions you need to make when you're in a resort holiday. And also, I think if people are aware that there are these other motivations that they can tap into, even if they've not been raised in those motivations for travel, it can introduce them to a new way of traveling that they might find really fulfilling. And maybe they read it and go, actually, do you know, I'm just going to be quite happy sticking to a resort. And at the same time, they might go, but do you know what? For a couple of nights this week, I'm just going to go and eat in town rather than in the all-inclusive restaurant at the hotel.
Yeah.
I love that. I agree, because I think, I mean, I sometimes get a little bit too hyper vigilant about some of my thoughts, you know, the way I think would be better for people to travel. And it's, you know, it's a good reminder that, but I think the most important thing is if we can get people to ponder, you know, it's why am I doing this? And, you know, yeah, it's totally legit. You know, I've been working really hard all year. I just want to go somewhere and sit by the pool for a week. Totally fine. But if they can, you know, also do a little bit of something else, that's also great. Or at least if they just recognize that's what I'm doing this time. Maybe next trip I might do something different. But yeah, that kind of, yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
Now,
and certainly different motivation match at different times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to move on to serendipity, because I love the chapter about serendipity, and I hadn't really thought much about that before, but immediately I thought of, you know, thousands of things that have happened on my travels that, you know, were absolutely serendipitous. I think the one you give the example of is going in Sudan. You end up at a Sufi festival, which A, you wouldn't have found out about otherwise, like there was no information really, and B, someone told you, but then you weren't supposed to be nearby. Is that right? And so you kind of end up with this experience. I remembered I accidentally ended up in southern Tunisia at the Sahara Festival in Duz one Christmas. I never heard of it, you know. Yeah, there's a little bit of information if you go look for it, but it's like 20 years ago. There probably was almost no mention of it back then. But it was one of the best things I've ever done. You know, there was like camel races where the camels all went in, you know, various directions. There was like camel races which were men from various Middle Eastern countries in camel suits, like front and back racing, and, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff that I will never forget. And, you know, we were basically the only tourists there. And my boyfriend at the time had a proper camera, so they just assumed him a journalist, and we got escorted straight through to the front row. Fabulous festival, completely serendipitous, you know. But so I wondered if you could speak a bit more about the value of serendipity, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, interesting side note, a large majority of the camels that you find in North Africa actually come from Australia
No,
these days. Yeah,
so
seriously,
we
because you
send them
guys have
back.
got, yeah, because
We've
you've
got
got loads of
the
camels that
largest
you don't want.
population in the world. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
interesting side note, on that trip to Tunisia, I got chatting to a young guy there who'd said to me, hey, when he found out I was from Australia, he was like, hey, you guys have like wild camels just walking around, don't you? Why don't you go and collect them? And I was like, oh, yeah, good point. I didn't. Yeah. So yeah.
Turns out they
Anyway,
do, and now send them to North Africa and Arabia. Yeah, so serendipity is just when things happen that you couldn't have planned that become good. And it's so tempting, reflecting what we were talking about just before, when you've only got a couple of weeks of holiday a year, you've only got a limited amount of money, and you've been looking forward to it, to absolutely ram your holiday time full from dawn until dusk with all the things you wanted to do, all the things that you found on TripAdvisor or Instagram, or the galleries, or the museums, or the restaurants, or the bars. And it's so tempting to just make it feel like work. But when I reflected on the things that I really remember from my travel, it's very rarely a particular art piece I plan to see. And it's never even what I ate in a Michelin starred restaurant. As a travel journalist, I've ended up eating at a couple of them. I don't tend to book into Michelin starred restaurants and pay for them. But I never remember exactly what I've eaten, unless it's like a really remarkable experience. What I do remember are the calf that we found on top of on a rooftop in Marrakesh, where you went downstairs to get the meat from the butchers to then take upstairs and cook. Or I remember an event like this festival in Sudan, where Lev and I, a friend and I, were on this expedition called Walking the Nile. He was spending 9 months walking the entire length of the River Nile, and I walked 1,000 kilometers roughly with him. And we were supposed to take a certain route, and then our route had to change because of some security situation with the Sudanese government. And we'd stopped at a cafe earlier on that day, and this guy said, "Oh, you should go and visit this festival." I'm like, "Oh, we can't. I would love to, but it's not on our way." Then our route changed that evening, so we went to go see this festival the next day, and it was this remarkable Sufi festival in the middle of the desert. So, Sufism is a branch of Islam that is where you see whirling dervishes. It's very musical. It's much more celebratory. It's quite fun to see. And they were very inclusive and getting us involved and sharing the food with us and all these sorts of things. And we wouldn't have had that experience had we not had that encounter with that person, had our plans changed. But also, we had loads of time because all we were doing was walking. So we had nothing else to do except walk
You didn't have a
and
bus to
see
catch to
things
the
on the
next
road.
day. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. We didn't have a booking at a restaurant, or we didn't have to be at this point on this date for our transfer. Lev just had to walk to the end of the river and he would get there eventually. So
Just. Yeah.
having just yeah, it's quite a long river, the Nile.
Hmm.
So we had all the opportunities we were then able to fulfill, and it just opened up the space to learn about places. Because
Hmm.
when you're not rushing, you notice things and you start conversations, and through that you can have remarkable experiences. And those are the things that you remember.
Yeah.
The accidental rather than very heavily curated and planned experiences, I find, are the ones that really stick in my memory.
Yeah, same. And I'm sure Justin would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the way to introduce serendipity into your own travel is just to not plan too much. Leave gaps of opportunity within your timetable. There's a few tips. It's like, if you go to a new city, do a couple of things. Get up at dawn, partly because it helps your body clock reset. Try and then walk to the top of the highest point that you're able to, get a view out over the place, see what things interest you along the way. Go to a cafe, drink the local drink, go to a restaurant, eat the local meal. Uh, if it's a place that sells alcohol, go to the pub and drink the local beer. So, like Australia's a really good example. You've got different states and different beers in different states, and that can give you an insight into the history. Is what rugby team do they sponsor? So you get all these accidental little pathways that can take you off.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that idea. I mean, I like to get up early and wander, but just adding to that, as you say, go to the highest spot and get an overview. Like, yeah, great idea. Really, sort of sets the scene for where you are, and who knows what you find along the way. That's so often
And
the best bit.
it also gives you something to do, because I think one of the things that always happens, one of the reasons why people fill their calendar when they go on holidays are like, "Oh, I feel like I should be doing something whilst I'm here. Well, just walk to the top of a hill.
That's
That'll get you
something then.
started."
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
There's an old FOMO thing that people have, and they feel like they've got to utilize their time to do activities that they can then talk about when they get back. Whereas if you've just spent all morning or all afternoon wandering around a neighborhood, just looking at shops and houses and hunting stray dogs and cats, which I tend to do sometimes, and things like that.
Hunting with your camera, I'm assuming.
My camera, of course, yes. And to get a pat or two, yeah. But that kind of stuff. Nobody, like, you come back home and it was a special moment for you, but there's nothing really of value for anyone else. But of course, and that's where I think people always want to have something. They feel like they've got to have a list of things they've done and photos, with them
Proof
at a location, proof that they were there. And I it's such a foreign thing to me because I don't see any need to do it, but a lot of people do. And I have had people ask before. I've been on whole trips where there was not a single photo with me in it, and people go,
But I was talking to one of the cool things about having written the book is I get invited to lots of literary festivals, and then they ask me to host events. And I was hosting an event at Hay Literary Festival with a woman who wrote a book about the impact of technology in mediating our experience, and how it's no longer about the experience, it's about the proof of experience. For example, rather than wanting to go on holiday, you want to, there's a drive to get that photo in that place to stick on Instagram. I don't know if you've ever been to the Greek island of Santorini, but if you go to the west of Santorini at sunset, it is very weird. It's basically just loads of people trying to replicate a particular photo. It's quite an odd thing. And so what are you doing here? You're just trying to get a photo, and I suppose there's a particular photo for sort of social proof. So there's this thing that exists in travel that just didn't exist 10 years ago,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's completely altered the experience of some forms of travel. And something related to that is what is the thing that you do at home? So it's very tempting to be like, oh, I'm off to Paris, therefore I should go to all the museums and galleries. Now, if you don't go to museums and galleries at home, don't go and do it in Paris. If
Yeah.
you love going to the pub at home, go to the pub in Paris because you'll have a brilliant time. If you love
Yes.
eating food, if you love going to watch football
Yeah.
at home, go and watch football in Paris. And they're also a very good team at the moment. They just won the Champions League. So there's like a whole host of things. And like walking across cities is such a wonderful experience. You know, just a small example of just thinking about the major different cities that I've walked across in Australia. You only need to walk like 2 or 3K to get a sense of the place. Like, oh, this one has a river in it. This one has a financial district. This one has a harbour. This one feels like a big country town. And you that walking gives you a sense of place and culture. And regional culture varies much more than you think. And going places on foot is a very powerful way to engage with it. And then you spot the things that you want to engage with, like pubs.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's such good advice. Yeah. You don't become a different person just because you have got on a plane and used
Yeah.
your passport.
Yeah.
So you still like the same things you like. So yeah.
Yeah.
Don't try and pretend just because that's what you think you should do. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, of course, if there's things that you wish you could do more of at home and you now have the
Sure.
time
Yeah.
for it,
Yeah.
like hiking, for example, I live in the centre of London,
Yeah.
but my background, I used to do like long walks, like walking the Nile. I was in the
Yeah.
Army Reserve Infantry. I used to do a lot of walking. I
Mm.
mean, I walk around London quite a lot, but it's pretty cool when I get to go on holiday and walk up a hill.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good example that, yeah, you might not get the chance to do it at home, but it's something you do like to do. That's
Yeah.
fine. But if, yeah, I agree.
And I have the
Sorry,
complete
Justin, go.
opposite because I have nature out my back.
You have
Yeah.
kangaroos out your back.
I
You're
have
like
kangaroo. I can see
living up
kangaroos.
the Aussie
And things like
stereotype.
so, and Canberra, I get all these bushwalks. So while I'm not massively a huge fan of big cities, but I literally I just got back from Japan last week, and Tokyo was just so fascinating to just wander around and just it. You don't have to go to anything that people say go see. You just have to walk around it, catch a train, get off of the station, and just wander around. And it's just such a fascinating experience, and it's one that I like to go and walk and see things, but I'm not. It's a different environment. I think sometimes I go and do a national park in another country, and it's not as good as some of the ones I might have on my doorstep. I go, maybe that wasn't worth it. But I mean, it always is. It's still different. But yeah. I think
Ironically, that's the one challenge of living in London. The various foods that you get in London are so good that you go places and you're like, oh wow, pasta's probably better at that place I went to in London.
I can imagine that is
it does, and it does
a hazard.
the proximity to where, like, certainly in Australia, the Asian food is amazing.
Excellent. Yeah.
And some of the European foods like Italian and Greek, because we had a large immigration, they're amazing here. But South American cuisine, there's nothing in Australia that's really been anything close to what I've had in South America, and same with African cuisine and things like that. So that all does make a huge difference, that kind of stuff. So when you're traveling, like, you might have that the food's not as good, but it's always going to be better at the source. But it may not be the wow factor. I don't know. I always find it good. But
Justin, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to talk about that topic that I forget when you discovered it, Amanda, the type 1 and 2 fun. One of your guests mentioned it, and
years ago.
It was a few years ago. I think it was during COVID, wasn't it? It might have been around.
I did
COVID.
look it up actually the other day, and I can't remember. But continue.
No,
I'll look it up.
I remember the episode, and it was like suddenly this door had been opened up. What's this type 1 and type 2 fun that you've just talked about? And I've got this theory that, because as I said, I've just come back from Japan, and people go to Japan, and the first thing most people want to do is go back to Japan. And I have this theory that going to Japan is kind of a bit of like that type 2 fun. It's hard, but then there's so much ease the Japanese make it very easy for you, so you get all the benefits of that hard to do travel and fun, but it's easy. So people are getting the best of both worlds in that regards. Like, if you know what I mean, like they're stepping out of their comfort zone.
I think for people who aren't familiar with it, type 1 fun is something that's just fun. Like, you're like, that's great. I'm really loving this. Type 2 fun is something that is really unpleasant at the time and you probably want it to stop. But when you finished it, you go, that was great. I'm going to do it again. Like, I don't know, running a marathon or hiking up a mountain. Like, it's really, really hard. And then at the end of it, you go, actually, that was amazing. I want to go do it again.
Yeah, I guess I was coming from out of their comfort zone more in that regards, but it's kind of like, you see people and they foreign languages and everything like that, and people always worry about this kind of stuff. And and like, oh, the language, I don't know what to do. Yeah, everyone, they go to Japan, the first thing they want to do is go back to Japan. And it was just, I don't know, it may not quite fit into this type 1-2 fun then, but it's
That's not a way of thinking. That's not an analogy that I've thought about before. About what, like, could you have type 1 travel and type 2 travel? Type 1 travel is going to Ibiza or where you're just raving all the time and you sound a brilliant time. Type 2 fun is like when I went backpacking around India for the first time, I was like, oh my God, this is at the age of 18, like, this is overwhelming. But it was a really life-changing experience. You've then got so I referred to 2 other types of fun. Type 4 fun is something that is really, really challenging, but you start to enjoy it at the time. It's when you start to develop competence. So if you get to a point where you're fit, then running becomes type 4 fun. It's like it's called I explore the notion of a flow state in the book, which is by a thinker called Chernetsev. My pronunciation not great.
I know,
there. And
Mikhail C.
Mikhail C. And that's when you start to get to flow states where something is good but challenging at the same time. And I would say that, that's maybe what people aim for in travel, where it's challenging, but you're like, this is great at the time. Right, that's type 4 fun. And then there's type 3 fun, which is no fun at all, where it all just goes disastrously wrong. Like you break a leg whilst running, or you get lost on a mountain. Like, you're like, that was a bad thing.
Makes a good story later, though.
Yeah, because I think
it does make
great podcast story.
Well, I explore the challenge about telling stories, because the example I use in the book is when Lev and I were in a mountain, we got lost, ended up in a survival situation, and eventually had to get found. We didn't have to quite get rescued, but we had to get found. And I think it's important to be very careful about telling type 3 fun stories, because often people, in order to justify it, add a level of benefit from it that probably isn't true. And I use example of a guy who climbed Mont Blanc on the France-Italy border, who was literally carried up the last 1,000 meters or so by porters, went blind from snow blindness and nearly died. And then when he came down, he basically had a speaking tour in London. This was back in the 18th or 19th century. 19th century, and he was saying, oh, it was an amazing thing, the views are incredible, it was worth all the effort. It's like, well, you probably didn't actually have the views because you were snowblind, and that's not true, is it? The problem is it can encourage other people to go and do the same thing who are not necessarily prepared for it.
And see, I was thinking of it. I did a trip many years ago which was completely fun, but we were camping. It was a trip through Central Asia, and there was a lot of camping in places. We got bogged, we got all sorts of things. There was a lot of not fun things going wrong, and things that go wrong in travel always, and then they go well, always makes these great stories. And I was just trying to,
always the most downloaded podcast episodes too.
And I mean, that's not what I would call like type 1 fun. It was never fun at the time. It was kind of, the resolution was like, and then afterwards you go, you know what, that was a great experience. I've learned something from that. I might have even found it a little bit fun in hindsight, but I was trying to fit some experiences like that into how you label these types of fun, because it was just something I was thinking about. I'm going, well, it's
It's
So,
definitely an approach I've not considered before about like labeling different types of travel. What I actually explore in that chapter is hardship, about
yeah, yeah,
going off to do physically hard things and the role that dopamine plays in that, how it helps us with our learning, how if you repeat a task and get a reward from it, you develop a system that makes you want to repeat that task.
yeah, yeah,
So when people talk about becoming addicted to travel, there might be an element of that. Curiosity is what encourages to try stuff. When we get when it works out well, we get a dopamine response, and then that creates the desire to do something again. Now that system could be hijacked by things that aren't good for us, whether it's gambling, sex addiction,
Mm.
drugs, alcohol addiction, and
mm,
it strange enough, it's even associated with people becoming radicalized
yeah,
into extremist beliefs. So you know the
Mm.
dopamine system is agnostic. it it doesn't
mm,
only push you towards good or bad things, but it's if we have experiences that give us some kind of benefit, then it makes us want to repeat. So there's definitely a case to be made that that's what happens in travel because we gain something from it. And
yeah,
one of the most powerful things we gain from it is the ability to explore ourselves in ways that we never get to do at home.
Yeah.
And you know, I talk about this quite a lot in the later chapters, but it's about the opportunity to explore often neglected parts of yourself. Because when you're at
yeah,
home,
Yeah.
you're mostly meeting people who, well, you're nearly always meeting people who speak the same language as you, come from the same general cultural background as you. You have the
yeah,
same kind of conversations, usually with the same people, and you take the same route to work or school. As
yeah,
soon as you go somewhere else, somewhere other, you're forced to be like, how do I cope when somebody doesn't speak my language? How do I cope when I don't know what I'm eating? And you can discover, oh, it turns out I'm quite good at being in crowded situations, or turns out I love being at a football game, which you haven't done at home. So you discover
mm,
these often neglected parts of yourself. And that's where this idea of discovering yourself when you travel comes from. That's what we really mean. We discover a part of ourselves that we didn't know existed.
yeah,
Yeah, by having those different circumstances.
yeah.
Yeah, so true. I'm just wary of the time because I do want to fit in a couple of watcher
Yeah.
questions if we can. So I've just got one more the final chapter. So it was very moving. Justin and I have had some conversations on the podcast years ago about grief and travel as well. And I lost my mum early last year and found traveling quite different after that. She was
Mm.
always like somehow very involved. You know, we traveled a lot together. When I traveled, I would always FaceTime her. You know, she was very she was what caused me to travel in the first place, and she was always so interested. Like she was my number one travel fan. So I wondered, just for everyone who's listening, could you just summarize a little bit about that trip to New Zealand after you'd lost your mum as well?
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about losing your mum, Amanda, because it's a horrible thing, particularly when
It
they're
is,
such
yeah.
a integral part to something else that you love. So you love your mum, but if you love travel and they're integral to it, then it's a double loss. And yeah, I hope that reading that chapter wasn't too triggery because
It
you
was
know,
beautiful, thank you. Yeah.
the final chapter is about me losing my mum. And I mentioned earlier I'm half Indian, but I was raised by my mum. She is English, and she's the reason I travelled. So that rugby tour we mentioned right at the beginning, we lived in social housing. Mum was working as a cleaner at the time, and she got a second job as a cleaner to pay for my ticket to go on that rugby tour. It was a subsidised rugby tour, very unusual for a state school. But she said, "I think this is really important for you," and it changed
Mm.
my life. I did have to learn how to play rugby to get on that tour, so it was
Yeah,
another thing that she
I love
encouraged me
that.
to do,
Yeah.
which is quite hard when you're 16 because you have a sense
Yeah,
of self-preservation.
Yeah.
So
good
my
on you,
dad
mate.
died when I was 21. I wasn't too bothered, sort of mildly relieved, if I'm honest, because I
Mm.
didn't have a particularly good relationship with him. He was a very difficult person to be affiliated with.
Mm.
Whereas when mum died, I found it absolutely devastating. She was just brilliant. She was just amazing, and I loved hanging out with her. I loved spending time with her. She always
mm,
saw me off at the airport, even when I was in
Mm.
my late 30s, when I was
Oh,
off on an expedition.
wow.
Um, and I would always FaceTime her and send her postcards. And so when she died, actually, I don't actually tell this bit in the book, but when she died, my like the first thing I sort of turned to was travel. Like I was wrecked for
mm,
months, and my wife and her friends were planning on going to Sri Lanka. They said, "Oh, why don't you come?" And I went, and it was a beautiful part of Sri Lanka, gorgeous villa, amazing food. beautiful beaches, and I hated it. And I was really, really miserable because everyone else there was having a really jolly time. And I had nothing to do in this beautiful place. And I just wanted to feel grief. And I sort of wanted the world or the things that I was doing to reflect that or give me a way to process it. And I came across these concepts of grief travel, which is 5 different ways you can travel to um, engage with your grief. One is just sort of time to just be by yourself and reflect on the grief. There's commemorative, there's active, there's a bunch of different examples that I give. But for the sake of this, I realized that I wanted to go to New Zealand with mum. We talked about going together. Um, so I took her ashes there. We never actually got to travel to New Zealand together, but it's a place that she loved. It was a place that mattered a lot to me in relation to travel because she'd sent me there. And she traveled there in the 70s, 1970s. And she'd also traveled there just after she got over cancer for the first time. And her favorite place was a town that I lived in called Wanaka. And when we went there, we took my wife and I took our daughter Lyra, whose middle name is my mum's, and who was born almost a year to the day after mum passed away. So they never met. They never crossed over. And we ended up carving a piece of stone on the west coast, but a blue stone which matched my wife's eyes and my daughter's eyes. And my daughter inherited blue eyes from my mum via me, and obviously from her own mum. And then I saw a Maori friend of mine who gave me a job when I lived in New Zealand, and he told me that this is the stone. He told me it had to have a name, a Maori name. And I told him the story about mum's eyes and Lyra's eyes, and he gave it the name which in Maori means I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past, because the stone will always remind me of mum. And he said in Maori metaphysics, the past and the present and the future are always intertwined. So your mum will always be looking out after your daughter through those eyes. And then that afternoon, we went and scattered mum's ashes on a mountain overlooking Wanaka, which is her favourite place in New Zealand. It was my favourite place in New Zealand. It's my favourite place in New Zealand. And so, the grief is not gone. I still miss mum, and I still, even now, I'm like starting to cry thinking about it. But it was a way for me to engage with that grief and take something out of it, which is this story, this memory, this bond between my mum and my sister. My sister came along as well. My mum, my wife, my sister, my daughter, and I, and this place that we love so much. So, you don't have to go to New Zealand to do it. It happened to be the place that meant so much to me and my family, and this stone meant a huge amount to me.
I love it. It's just a very special story. I think it's yeah. I don't know what to say. I thoroughly enjoyed reading that, and it really took me back to thinking about my mum and our connections as well. So
I just the bit I struggled most with, although it was good, was the bit where you took your mum out to see the sunset, and it just reminded me how my attitude. My mum thankfully is still alive, and she still drops me off at the airport and picks me up. And I think that when the time comes, I'll be pretty devastated. But I had a good friend who died of cancer, and we went to we went and did a trip into the US, something that we talked about, and I didn't realize how bad he was until we were on the trip with his wife and I, and he got back, and I think it was only a few months. But I think the point I get from every story I hear about other people's grief and is to just not don't put things off, because you don't know if you've got an opportunity to do something with someone, and take that opportunity, because you don't know if it's the last one, or you don't know. And
you never know.
You never know. And I think that's what I get from all of that. And I just the whole thing about watching the sunset with your mum was just very touching, I think. And such a little thing, such a good thing.
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your friend too, Justin.
I think it's sort of everyone. I think everyone's got someone they know that's had that kind of, especially with cancer, and so
I think it's also a reminder that I mum passed away by the time I went to New Zealand with her, so that's more way there of dealing with the grief itself. And then in what it does, as you pointed out, is it highlights the value of spending time with others. So
Yeah.
travel is a way you can do that with others.
Yeah, and
but
have
you don't
really
have to
special
travel.
memories. Yeah.
Yeah, and have really
Well,
special moments. But you
travel,
don't
life in general, just anything,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
don't have to travel far, and you don't have to spend a
No,
lot of money. You know,
Yeah.
no. Like,
but living where we do in England, like the British Isles are pretty diverse. So there's a lot you can see here. You could go a couple of hours down the road and you're in this amazing countryside, and of course we've got Europe nearby. But it's definitely those moments. Like I don't know, some of the things I remember most of my mum were going to get a bowl of noodles around the corner from
yeah,
my flat when we were living in South London, and little bits and pieces like that. Those are the things that you remember, and it's an indication of the way you can actually make travel more fulfilling if you are going to go long
Yeah.
distances.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Julie, who's watching, has said, "Thank you for sharing that story about your mum. The chapter where you explore grief and travel was my favorite." So I agree.
Thank
Julie.
you,
It was my favorite too.
thank you, Julie.
Yeah. All right. So we just have a couple of minutes. If there's anyone watching either on the Zoom or on Facebook, obviously on Zoom, feel free to what do you call it? Not unmute your video. Turn your video on and unmute your mic. If you want to ask a question, and if you're watching on Facebook, just pop a question in the chat there. If anyone's got something that they want to say to Ash, give everyone a second. We might not have anyone we might have answered all your questions.
it's yeah. I was going to say, Ash, there's a lot of things I said to Amanda before. I said I might have to read it again because you go into quite a lot of detail, citing a lot of sources and things like that for a lot of these things. And I'm like, I read it and I'm like going, sometimes at 10 o'clock at night, and I'm going, I need a clearer brain to go and dive deeper into what you're talking about here. But there's just so much good information, and there's just so much thought has gone into each of these 12 topics to really. And I mean, I don't even know that list in itself is probably not even an exhaustive list, but it seems to cover a lot of very good reasons why people travel.
Yeah, I
Especially,
tend to find when I'm talking.
So
Yeah, I tend to find when I'm talking to people that most of their other travel motivations tend to fit in as a subset of most of these.
Yeah.
And I'm comparatively unusual in that I've traveled in lots of different careers and in lots of different ways. Like I have managed to make my job out of it, both as a journalist, teacher, student, soldier. So lots of different ways. So therefore, I've had like quite a wide range. But I mean, most of it came from me interviewing other people and finding out how they travelled and why, and then drawing that back into this. But on the science stuff, I was trying to be really careful about making it accessible. I used to be a science teacher and I do defence and security journalism, and I think explaining things to people in a way that it makes sense to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an engineer and it's all very understandable to me, but I think it's just there was just so much in there, and I was just like thinking that am I getting everything out of this book on the first read? I need to read it again.
Well, I was reading it during the day, so I went down a lot of rabbit holes. It took me
I often
the sources were like, ooh.
I often wanted to Google something, but I was in bed reading the book, and I'm like going, no, let's just read the book. I'll focus on the book.
I've just had a message from Tracy saying there are some questions on Facebook, but I can't see. Oh, she's such a dear. She has copy and pasted them for me. Okay, Kat has asked a question for later about serendipity. I loved the concept and have lent into it in my past solo travels, but have ended up in dangerous situations for a solo female traveler. I almost feel envious of some of the serendipitous experiences Ash had, as I'd maybe shy away for the sake of safety. I'd love to hear how to achieve serendipity, but in a safer way for a female solo traveler.
Yeah, and I briefly touch on this in the book. I've talked about it more in journalism and other things. It's really important for people like me to remember the sort of privilege we have in the case of being both comparatively wealthy on a global scale, definitely living in a country with laws of freedom and a decent enough justice system, but also being a bloke. And I think I'm probably not the best person to give. I mean, I can give ideas, but I don't know what the lived experience is like of being a woman traveling. Like having done some work around violence against women and girls and doing some research and reading around it, I'm starting to develop better insight. But there are some very good authors out there who do write better about the experience of traveling as a woman and who can probably give better advice. There's a woman called Sue. It might even be Sue Marshall. There's just a piece in the Telegraph recently that wrote about it. So what of that? I've got to be careful to not give advice on something that I don't know anything about, really. I know what it's like for me. I know how I can gauge my security in situations, but there's also places I'm not as reckless necessarily as maybe that comes across. And certainly now that I have a family, I'm not reckless. I'm
It
pretty
changes
cautious.
it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got detained by the KGB and questioned briefly by the GRU during my New Iron Curtain journey. The security service in Belarus is still called the KGB.
Yeah.
Briefly
I learned
detained, I
that
was
from
just
your
held
book.
somewhere
Yeah.
for more.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I wouldn't be doing that again. So,
No.
you know, there are cases where pursuing serendipity, which in that case I was doing, I was trying to go and find the place that the Soviet Union had been signed off, ended, the end of the Soviet Union had been signed off. I mean, I nearly ended up, this guy popped out with a Kalashnikov. So there's definitely ways that you can go too far. One, you know, as for solo women, a really good way of doing it, and it sounds contradictory of creating serendipity, is by traveling with some good tour operators.
I agree, actually. Yeah.
And there's some great, I am much more open to group travel than I was years ago. Like when I was 19,
Group travel is
it's one
also
of
much
those,
better now, I think. Like there's so many great operators doing
it's
different
not
things.
it's not a bus of 50 people. You don't have to do a bus of 50 people.
Yeah.
that's it.
Continue.
And I think that's what people think of. People
Six
think
like
group travel is coach travel.
Yeah.
And but the two companies that I know, I'm pretty sure they operate in Australia. Three companies that I know that do this pretty well are Intrepid, Explore, and G Adventures.
Yeah.
The fastest growing demographic in travel is solo women over 45 or maybe 50, but it's the fastest growing group
Interesting.
for the reasons that Tracy has just mentioned. It's how do you engage with the world in a way that is kind of got that spirit of solo travel, but within the boundaries and safety of some level of guidance and security. So it's I'd say do that for a bit until you start to develop some of those skills to be able to do it yourself.
I think there's also something to be said for some of those group tours. Like some of them, like they're the all women tours, and they're like 8 to 12 people, and you get a lot of access to people that you probably can not meet or find in other ways. So, yeah, I mean, I miss
That's a really
go on.
That's a really good point. One of the things that I really get to do as a journalist, I have a reason to ask people questions, and I get to be nosy. And sometimes I get given really good access because I'm a journalist. It's been set up by a PR company. Traveling with a group like Intrepid Explorer G Adventures also does that for you. Because they're local experts, and all three of them, like I know the teams that work in the UK, all three of them are very good at engaging with at the local community level to ensure that tourism is ethical and socially sustainable to put money back in the local community. So some of them are kind of partly behind some really remarkable initiatives that give you access to local culture that you know are hard to
It's
do if you're
almost
just
impossible
backpacking.
otherwise. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So
I was just going to throw out there, it's probably not relevant right now, but I think I read something about it. I read something it might have been on Intrepid's website, and they did a women's only. They were doing women's only tours to countries like Iran. Now, may not be safe right now, but the thing was, those women had a completely different experience going to Iran with other women because they got access to the local women who they got to talk to. Whereas if they went with their husband, they got ignored because everyone wanted to talk to their husband. So even though they were probably quite safe with their husband, as they would be with the group of women, they had a completely different experience. And so that's probably where you might get those serendipitous moments by doing these things.
yeah.
I don't know, again, same with Ash. Being a male, I have a completely different experience. But at the same time, I look at other men, what other men do, and I go, well, you're asking to get kidnapped, or and I'm always conscious of things like being wealthy is also a problem.
Yeah.
privilege,
So
Sorry,
there's,
Ash, what were you saying?
you've touched on something really interesting there, which is it's very easy to look at one to only notice one's disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
So, like, as a person of color, sometimes I probably get treated slightly differently, despite being a middle class white, a middle class male Brit. I do sometimes get treated slightly different to my friends who are not people of color. However, there are other things where I get given access as a product of that they might not. But being in a pool, I noticed I was with a group of everyone else in the group was white. I noticed that the kids and teenage boys in particular would speak to me first and be curious because they're like, oh, this guy's a bit different to the others. Well, this guy's a bit like me. How can I gain that access? And speaking to indigenous cultures as well, like certainly there where so much has been taken from indigenous cultures by the colonizing powers, and they've lost so much that their stories and their culture is very, they don't want to give that away. And there's sort of like I remember somebody saying to me once, oh, you're from India, the Brits screwed you over too, so I'll be all right chatting to you. These unexpected, and as a woman, just in that example you just gave from Iran is an amazing one of how sometimes your protected characteristics, which you can see which is sometimes a disadvantage, not to deny it, can also sometimes give you opportunity and access to your lives.
Absolutely, yeah. Tracy in the chat has also said, and I remember, I know Tracy, she's another podcaster. She did one of Intrepid's all women trips to India last year.
Amazing.
And, and it was absolutely
That would be
amazing.
a similar
Got to meet lots of women, which would otherwise
Brilliant.
would not really happen. So
That's amazing.
Yeah. There's one more comment. I think a question. Ina sends a hug from Norway, so we are beaming all over the place. Okay.
So,
and from earlier on, Kat had also said there's definitely a hybrid approach to an all-inclusive holiday. You can remain curious about the local staff and their lives and go on activities and learn about the coral reef or something. So absolutely with the right approach.
Yeah, and look, particularly if you're traveling with kids, having a load of stuff that you don't need to think about can be really helpful. And it gives you it's similar to that thing about traveling with a group. It gives you a structure and security that you can then be a bit more adventurous outside of.
Yep, exactly. Tracy also said, I love the grief story, the story about mum. It really resonated. Thank you for sharing. So I think that is all. Facebook's been strange because I actually can't see where all these chats are appearing. So thank you, Tracy, for copy pasting them for me. That was fabulous. Anyone else? Last call for questions. While I've done that, I would say thank you so much, Ash. Thank you for writing this excellent book, which is kind of like a Bible that fits our podcast themes for the Thoughtful Travel podcast. And
thanks.
Go on.
Thanks for having me on, guys. And I hope that anyone that does read the book finds it. I mean, hopefully some of the stories are quite fun as well, but hopefully they actually find it useful to go, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you just go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's a nice outcome. So actually,